Today is June 24th, 2013. We are here at the campus of Ball State University. Today we are interviewing Mr. Fred Glancy, who is a former United States Marine and served during World War II. Mr. Glancy, can you tell us when you were born and where you were born?
Yeah, I was born in 1922 in Blackford County, Indiana, and at home, at my folks' home.
At your residence. And you grew up during the Depression and learned very early on about hard work. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, I would say it was hard work. We did everything on our hands and knees, and we had no tractors at the time, had horses and so forth, and so everything was manual. It was not mechanical.
And you, from a very early age, you were given quite a bit of responsibility. How did that affect your life later on?
Well, my father was a principal of the school in this township there in Blackford County, right outside of Hartford City, Indiana. And he also had a vegetable farm, which was about a square mile, all small vegetables. So it was, we had quite a few. But back at that time, they didn't have refrigerated semis and everything and trucks to haul vegetables from the West Coast or be shipped in and sent to the stores and all that type of thing. Also, it was during the time of the Depression. And my father also had a grocery store. And all these places, I had to start working when I was pretty young, running errands and doing this and doing that. And at 5, I remember being with my dad, and we'd have a truckload of vegetables going down the street. He'd take one side of the street, I'd take the other, and knock on doors and ask the people, would you care to buy any vegetables today? And they'd say, well, what do you have, little boy? And I'd say, well, beets, carrots, onions, radishes, sweet corn, tomatoes. I had it all down and had done it so many times it would just peel off. And they'd say, well, how much are your onions or something? I'd say a nickel a bunch, 3 bunches for a dime. And that's what really we sold them for. But it was during that time that even all of our rows of everything, all the vegetables were about 14 inches apart. So we'd weed and pull the weeds out by straddling one row and weeding up, taking one row and then weed up the other, and then we'd crawl up on our hands and knees. And some of the rows were half a mile long. So we'd start, and it would take us forever to get to the other side. We'd take a break, get on the rows, and start back. And so I had to learn to do some of it.
You had to learn to be an instructor as well.
Oh, definitely. A lot of the people were being laid off of factories and everything around, and it got worse as we went into the years. As each year would go by, it would get a little worse. And many of them didn't have jobs or anything, so everybody that wanted a job could work at our farm. And so the people that were working in factories would work out on the farm, and I'd have to train them how to use the different, like a rake. How do you really use that rake to level and get the clods broken up and all kind of stuff. But most of our land was muck land, which is very smooth, no clods in it. So that was one advantage we had. But I learned to train people, and I'm talking about way a lot older than I was, because I was only at that time about 7, 8 years old, and it was hitting 29, 30 in the 1929, 1930, 1931 along in there, and it taught me a little bit about leadership and about humility and what you had to do and what your responsibility in this life was all about. And my dad did a fabulous job of really teaching us this, all of we kids that. I happened to have been the oldest. I had a sister who was next. But just to give you an idea, so many people didn't even have lunch when they'd come to work. They wouldn't bring a lunch or anything. And my mother always was doing nothing. I can't remember her hardly being ever any place but in that kitchen a working. And then as my sister got old enough to help, my sister was in there. But she would feed all these men that were working, and we usually had 30, 40 people working on the farm there, because the time you took care of the crops, and then the crops were starting to come in. Some of them were in the spring even, real early spring. And we had honey, and we had apples, and my father had about 100 stands of bees. And so we had a lot of honey for sale, and just a lot of things that went with food products and all.
And as the 30s wore on and you got older, did you anticipate a war that you might be pulled into?
We were hearing about it, and I can remember we used to go to the movies all the time. That was the entertainment of people. They wouldn't go uptown from the farms or anything unless they had something that broke and had to go have it fixed or something. But they wouldn't go into the town only on a Friday night or Saturday night. And so the crowd on the sidewalks around the squares and on the streets were really packed. I mean, we little kids would go in and around the block, play hide and seek, all kinds of things. But it was just really tough during that time.
And did you anticipate that you would be joining the service?
Oh, I started to tell you that we would go to the movies, and in the movies they talked about the big Russian bear, and they'd show maps of Russia and a bear, and it would show his shadow going over into other countries. And I can remember that. And they were going over and they were attacking other countries. And then we would see pictures of Hitler and his talks and everything, and the crowds that were just mammoth in there. And I can remember those things, but they didn't mean too awfully much till they started taking and they started the draft and all. And when they started the draft, then there was a lot of people talking war and about all that all the time. So I heard that. And then after a short period of time of that, we got in and we heard about the war between where England was in fighting the Germans, and the Germans were attacking into France and Italy and all through that area. And during that time, I began to really take a little bit of a notice, because as I got into high school, I had boys that we run around together, and they worked out on the farm, and they were come up for draft, and they were drafted into the service. So I figured that I'd be going before very long. Well, Dad, he wanted me to go to college. So I said, okay, because that was just taken for granted, that all we kids would be going to college and everything. I hadn't picked out a college, don't like to mention what I picked at that time, okay. But I thought, he said, now if you're going to be a teacher, he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, there's one thing that you could become, that you work the year round. You don't have to worry about a summer job or anything, and we need them. and that is to be an agriculture teacher. Well, I hadn't been really trained in all kind of agriculture. I was sort of a specialist in vegetables, but I was really acquainted and had been around and everything. I'd milk cows and harnessed horses and all that kind of thing. But to really go in and know about the farms and everything, I was a little bit lacking some of that stuff. But I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. So I said, well, I think I'll go what you said, because you also would take science, and I like science. So I had to go to Purdue at that time, because Purdue was the land grant college, which was agriculture. And so I went there and signed up, and that was in 39. And so in 39, I graduated from high school, went into college, and just to give you an idea of how much that the folks trusted me and everything, and I felt very good and kind of big at that time about it. My mother took me down to Purdue University, and I had a box of clothes and everything that she could get in that big box. She took me down to the corner of the campus, dumped me out on the corner with the box, and took off and went back home. I was not registered. I hadn't signed up. I had been on campus when my dad would go down, because we were one of the first hybrid seed corn growers, where you had to detassel the corn, and most people have heard about detasseling and all, because a lot of them from the cities have gone out and worked on detasseling. But we went into the seed corn business in my high school years, and that just taught me that much more of independence. And I got a place to stay, and I went to Purdue then in ag education.
And you were at Purdue in December of 41 when the war broke out.
When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, I happened to have been that night that they bombed in the morning, but it was night here when we got the word and everything. We just come out of a big production of ice skating in Indianapolis. And the person that put on the show was a lady by the name of Sonja Henie, who had won the Olympics in ice skating. And we'd been to that show, and as we come out of that show, there were kids outside yelling, "War, war, war." Read all about it, and holding up the papers and everything. And we got a paper and took a look, and it was when Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. Right away, I really began to think about the war then. And were they going to draft me? What was my status, so forth and everything. A lot of the farm boys were not drafted because they needed them on the farm. And I could have probably stayed, but I didn't. That was in December the 7th of 1941. In February, 2 months later, I joined the Marine Corps.
At Purdue?
No, I was at Purdue, but that's not where I joined. Okay. I joined in Indianapolis. And I joined the Marine Corps, and they allowed me to graduate. And I was a senior. No, I was a junior. I have trouble at times. I was a junior then. I finished that year and went one more year. And in 43, I graduated. They graduated us early in 1943. And I went from there directly into the Marine Corps then.
Were
The
you-
reason I picked that is I did have enough information that I had gone up and I'd talked to the Navy, the Army, and the Marines about what they had to offer to somebody that had been to college and so forth. And the Army said, we will mark you for officer training. That doesn't mean we'll pick you, but if we do pick you, we'll be watching you, and if we pick you, then you'll go to officer training. If you don't make it, you're in the Army. The Navy said the same thing. When I went to the Marine Corps said, we will put you into officer training. If you do not pass officer training, then you will have a choice of leaving the Marine Corps and going and joining one of the other two forces, or you can join and stay in the just stay in the Marine Corps. So I thought, well, that's a pretty good deal, so I took the Marines.
How did you find the training? Was the training what you expected or harder?
I had a rude awakening. They sent our people, they sent us to, I'm sorry, my mind went blank on that right there. To the training in North Carolina. I was trying to think of South Carolina.
So you decided upon the Marine Corps, and upon your graduation, you went to your basic training.
Yes, I went to boot training at Parris Island. And I left home and went by train. And as the train got closer to Parris Island, I noticed that more young guys were getting on my age, the train. And finally we pulled into a station, and at that station there were a bunch of guys out around, milling around. And in a little bit we all unloaded, and mostly young guys were on there. And they come over and they said, okay, all you men that have signed up for the Marines, get on this train. Well, the train we got on was an old train where the steps were permanent steps and everything, didn't raise up. They had gas lights in them down the middle of the train, and you sit on each side facing in. And it was really old, and we started in and we go down, and finally we come to Parris Island. But on the way, just to give you an idea of my first encounter with the Marine Corps, there was a big sergeant got on. And as he got on there, he said, all right, in there, my name is Sergeant so-and-so, and he rattled off a bunch of stuff, and he said, all right, I'd like for everybody to stand up. And then in a little bit he yelled out, I said stand up, and boy, he belted out the stand up, and he was carrying a swagger stick like you'd whip a horse when you're riding in the Derby or something. He had one of those little long whips, and he come along, and there was some kid that was still sitting there, and he hit that kid on the shin and said, I said stand up, and boy, the guy jumped up. And then he said, now I want to show you how to stand at attention. And he showed us how to stand at attention. He said, all right, now when I tell you to stand at attention, I want you all at attention. And boy, he belted out attention, and we all stood at attention, but a couple, three, and he went around, he hit them across the chest. And I mean, it really woke us up. So then we get in, he gave us instruction all the rest of the way into Parris Island. When we got there and unloaded, as we went, they put us in big old cattle trucks. And when we got on there with the high sides on them, when we got in there and they started driving down into the main part of Parris Island barracks and everything, people were yelling out, "You'll be sorry, you'll be sorry." And that's all we could hear from all the guys along the way. We unloaded, and anyway, the first thing they did was take us and had us go to a place stripped down. They showered us and with hoses and everything. And it was really an awakening. And we started right out with training. I mean training. And as we got deeper into it and they started taking us out on hikes and everything, we went out into the swampland and that was there, and it was really an experience, and it was educational to me because I really watched everything that was going on and listened. I tried to learn as much as I could because I thought it would all help if I got to be an officer. Excuse me. Everything that I would do would help out, that I would know and could gather from everybody. Well, anyway, when our time was up there and we had gone through that, they sent us all to Quantico, Virginia, and that was to go into officer candidate school, what they called officer candidate. So we all went to officer candidate. And the guys were from all over the United States that I was with. But we formed just about a platoon of people, which is around 100, as I remember, in the platoon, about 100. We formed this platoon and then started into our officer training. And we had classroom work of different kinds. And on that we was graded. We had field work out where we did different things, and every place we were graded. And then once a week they'd post up a list of the people they were dropping. And of course, as soon as they'd post that, everybody run over to the bulletin board to see if their name was on there.
Do you remember how people got dropped? Was it on account of their grades?
On account of their grades and not being able to do certain things. It could be even physical. If they couldn't do so many push-ups or they couldn't do this or that, they dropped them. And the guys, it really hit them pretty hard.
What was worse, the mental or the physical challenges?
I would say they were both about the same. They were about the same, although the physical was really, really tough. I mean, they had us doing things that we didn't know we could do. We went beyond what we thought we could do or even dreamed of. So I would say probably the physical was more difficult.
Now, in mid to late 43, the U.S. Marines had some combat experience in the Pacific. Was any of that information coming back to you?
Oh yes, and they were introducing us to a lot of the different things that they had learned, like over at one of the first islands they'd gone back to. When they got done, they had learned some things about the Japanese and what they did and how they fought and everything. They had some guys at Guadalcanal, and those guys would say that whenever they got one of the Americans were captured, the Japanese would take and they would cut them up little by little and throw their parts back across, and they would do that with them alive. I mean, it was some pretty tough stuff that was coming back in. But then we were being taught how to handle that. I mean, how to keep from avoiding being caught and everything at night, because it was at night that they were sneaking in and doing all this. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of stuff that we were getting from feedback on things. Now, when we finished that, the guys that graduated out of officer candidate school went to officer training, and there they were to be trained as an officer. at that time, we had, when you left the officer candidate, you were commissioned.
Okay.
And once you were commissioned, you were now a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And then you went to the officer training, where that they trained you to be an officer and what your responsibilities were if you had different jobs and so forth. And that was mostly paperwork and everything, although they didn't let up on the other.
Were there courses in tactics and
All kind of things. Anything you want to name, we got part of it. Even from psychology and on, we got. And then when we finished up that, they assigned us to different places. Some guys were sent immediately overseas from graduating out of officer training. Some guys were sent here, different locations. When I got my orders, I was sent to artillery school. And the reason that I got into artillery school, they asked us what we would like to be in, but they didn't always get it. And I'd put down artillery because at Purdue, they have a training program there, and it was an Army artillery. So I'd had some basic artillery at Purdue. And so I put down artillery and I got artillery school. Well, the artillery school was at Purdue. At Quantico. I didn't move. I didn't have to move or anything. I'd also got married in the meantime, because I'd asked my wife, I said, if I don't get a leave if I get commissioned, if I don't get a leave and have been commissioned, would you marry me? And would you come to Quantico to get married? And she said that she would. If I got a leave, then we'd be married at home. But I didn't get a leave, I went directly in. And so at that time, we got married. And so she was at Quantico with me during the time I was in officer training and in the artillery.
you didn't stay in artillery school, or did you?
Yes, I stayed in. I graduated out of artillery school, and I thought then I would be sent overseas to an artillery unit. I got my orders from artillery school, and they sent me to Ohio State University. And at Ohio State University, they put me in they sent me there for the identification of all planes and ships of the world. And it was also visual aids, so that I was learning how to use visual aids in training of troops and so forth, and also learned all the ships and planes of the world. And at one time I could identify all the ships and planes of the world in 1/500th of a second. And I didn't care what direction or what, you could show me a shadow of one, I could name it. And that's what we had to learn to do there.
Did that sort of background in visual aids?
I couldn't imagine why that they did that, because most of the people that were there were Navy people, okay, and Air Force people. And I was a Marine from artillery, and I thought, what am I going to shoot artillery at a plane or a ship when they won't, unless the ship's pretty close to shore, I'm not going to be able to do anything anyway. So it was kind of a joke with me inside about why I was there. But anyway, I'll tell you what happened later. So anyway, after I was trained there and everything, I got my orders, and my orders was to go overseas, and I was to join the 4th Marines. Well, I didn't know what the 4th Marines was or anything at the time, and so anyway, I was to have a week's leave, a 10-day leave before I went overseas. So I stopped on the way across the United States at home, back here, and then went on overseas. I was by myself all the time. So far, I've traveled everywhere by myself up to Lynn. And when I got to, I had to report at San Francisco. When I reported there, they told me that there was no transportation yet to where I was going, and that I was to call in every morning at 9 o'clock and check and see if there was transportation. And they put me up at the Mark Hopkins Hotel, which was at the top of the mountain in San Francisco. So for about 2 weeks I was there. And then they said, okay, we've got transportation. So I passed under the Golden Gate and headed out. I went to a place called Maui, Hawaii. And on Maui, Hawaii was the 4th Marine Division. And I reported to the personnel man, and the personnel man, he looked at my orders and my training, and he said, what is visual aids anyway? He says, I've never heard of it. I said, well, it tells us how and what we can use other than when we train people, what we can do other than talking and demonstrating. And it tells us many things that we can do and use different equipment and how to do it and so forth. And he says, well, he says, I'll tell you, I'll just have to send you to the commanding general. So I met the general right off the bat. And the general said, what is this visual aids anyway? So I explained everything to him. He said, well, tell me one thing you do. I said, well, I'll tell you. I notice that we have a lot of equipment here, and a lot of it is new equipment, new kind of equipment that's being made, such as a Bangalore torpedo. And I said, there's all kind of booklets on it. There's a film on it. There's slides on it. There's all kinds of things. And I said, what we could do is to show those to the troops by movie, by the slides. We could give a lecture along with it, going along with the booklet, and just all kinds of things. He said, okay. He said, that sounds pretty good. He says, I want you to get all the stuff together you can find. And he says, no, he said, I'll tell you what, there was only about a half a dozen buildings on our base, and the rest of it was all tents. He said, we got an empty building down there. You just take that over and set it up, and you use it however you want, and let me know when you got the things gone. So I went down and I started, and I went to the personnel man, and I said, I need some help. So they assigned some guys, or had me to pick out some guys, and I picked some guys that had been cameramen at Hollywood and things like this, that would know something about projectors, and I picked repairmen and just all kinds of things that I could use of people, and put them together and set up a library of visual aids. And then I got information out to all of the units and everything, that we had all kinds of training things for them to use and all. And then before long, the general come over and took a look, and he says, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'm just going to tell you, I want you to draw up a training program for this division. And I was thinking, here I am, fresh out of a fresh buck lieutenant, and being made these kind of assignments. But it didn't even, I never thought too much about it. That was the job, that's all what I'll do. And I picked all that stuff up from my dad. I didn't question, I didn't even think about it. I just went and did it. So I drew up the plans and everything and took them in for him, and he says, okay, that's going to be the plans. I'll have a meeting. So he brought in all of the regimental commanders and had me to lay out what I was going to do and go over the plans of what we would try to do by week for each one of them. And then I got down to the daily thing on everything. But that went down to companies and so forth then.
So your responsibility, was that a new position that you became?
Yeah, I sure was.
The division did not have a training officer.
Well, they did, but they turned the training over to each of the units themselves. So the division really, they had a plans and training division. Plans and training division, there was a colonel over me, but I never got to work with the colonel very much because the general would bring me in above him. I mean, bring me around behind, really.
So you were able to take the kind of regimental training plans and coordinate all that activity.
Well, yes, for all of them. But that was for the whole division. You have about 10,000 men in a division of active men. You've got so many in supplies and so forth too. But I wasn't over into that part. I was into the fighting part of it. So
what year was this?
We were just entering 44 in through there. We were entering into the 1944. Mm-hmm. And I would say the latter part, the middle part of 44 that we was doing this, because my general called me in one day and he says, Glancy, he says, I've been talking to the General so-and-so over at the 5th Marine Division. I've been telling him what you've been doing, and he said he wants to know if I'd lend you over there to him for a while. And he said, what do you think about that? I said, hey, it's up to you. You're the man. So he said, okay, I'm sending you over there, and you go over and set them up, just what you've done here. I said, okay. So I went to the 5th Marine Division, which was over on the Big Island of Hawaii. And I went over there and I set that up. When I got it set up and underway, then I went back to the 4th Marine Division. And it wasn't too long after that we heard that we were going to be going into combat then.
Did you know what the target was?
Beg pardon?
Did you know what your mission?
No. And of course I didn't have any men, only my handful of guys that I had in our offices, I'd say, in the library, because they would check things in and out and all that kind of crap. And they did repair, and we had movies that we showed of the training and so forth, and so they did all that kind of thing. Well, when I learned that we was going to do that, I went to the general and I said, General, I said, when we are aboard ship, there's so much time that the guys have and everything. I said, what do you think about if I take and send a projector and one of my men aboard every ship that, as far as I can go, and I had about 15 guys, and I said, I'll assign one of them to each one of those ships, and they can show entertainment movies during the daytime down in the holds. And they could just go from hold to show them over and over and over. And I said, we got a lot of movies. The movies were coming in also, and they were coming in on 16 millimeter as well as the big film. And it come in 16 millimeter. So I went over to where they stored those, and I said I'd like to check out all of the movies that you have and everything. And I took those, and I got the guys together, and I divided them up, and it amounted that they all had about 10 movies apiece, is what they had, that I put to each one of them. And I said, now then, we were going to take, each one of you are going to have a projector, a 16 millimeter projector. But these are all for alternating current, and we're going to have to change them over to direct current because the ships were direct current. So one of the guys of mine could do that. So he took and showed some of the other guys how to do it, and they changed all the 16 millimeters over to the direct current. And I said, okay, now then, when we go aboard and when we land wherever we're going, and we land someplace, you all meet with me. You find out where I am, because I'll be at headquarters. You come there, wherever headquarters is for the 4th Marine Division. So they all had their instruction and all, and they got their equipment all ready and everything to go. And I told them we'd assign as soon as we knew what our ships were. And then on New Year's Eve, we loaded aboard ship. And I went aboard a ship, and I was on a ship by myself. And I had one of the guys with me, and he had a projector and everything. And we went aboard a ship and then went out for a ways and waited till everybody was loaded of all the different ships. And then we took off and we headed out. They didn't tell anybody yet. I knew where we were heading. We knew where we were going in headquarters at the general and in plans and training, and I'm sure all the rest of them did too, but we knew where we were going.
How did you feel about
How did I feel?
Yeah.
Nothing, only it was an island, and we was going to go. It always bothered me about what is war really like. What does it feel like that you have to kill someone or somebody's going to kill you? How do you feel? How do you feel when you die? How do you feel if you get hit? And those kinds of things entered my mind. Other than that, I was wondering about, could I do what the general would probably ask me to do? Could I do it? And everything under pressure and under combat conditions.
Your mission obviously was going to change once you were on the beach.
Once I was on the beach, when I'll get there, I'll get to the beach. But anyway, we started out and we just zigzagged over the Pacific from New Year's Eve all the way until the 19th of February. On the 19th of February, we come up onto this little spot of land in the ocean. And as we come up, and I looked around, as far as the eye could see in all directions were ships. And you could see over the island, believe it or not. You could see over, when you were aboard the ship here, you could see the other side and see all the ships all the way around. And it gave you really reinforcement to think that you had all that kind of support, with you. But on the way, the guy showed the movies, and the troops really loved it. And so did the captains of the ship, because the captains of the ship would have them to show a movie up in his quarters for him at every one of the ships. And my captain would say, Glancy, how are we on our movies? And I'd say, well, we've only got one left. He'd say, okay, I'll lower my boat tomorrow and you go trade them. So he'd lower the boat the next day and I'd take them and I'd go from this ship to another ship. I'd trade them the 10, go to the next one, trade them the 10, and go around and rotate those film. And I'd do that about every 10 days.
Did you mentioned earlier, you specified entertainment movies. These were not training films?
No, these weren't training. These here, they had sent them in, and I stored them because there wasn't any need for any of them because they were showing the movies by larger projectors, okay, like a movie projector that they have in the movies. And every night in the base, they showed a movie every night in each of the division or each of the regiments. They'd show a movie.
Did you choose entertainment films? Did you choose entertainment films as opposed to training just to give the men relief?
Oh yes, to go, yes. Oh yes, to get their mind. That was my idea, to get their mind off of it and have something to do that would relax them and keep them from going crazy, really. Because you get to thinking, a lot of the guys there were some mental breakdowns by guys worrying about going ashore and going in and everything. There was the stress of the waiting game, you know. Well, we got 5 more days, we got 4, we got 3. It's a different world out there. But anyway, that morning, and I was not with the general. The general, all of division headquarters was divided up amongst the different ships, so that if this ship would happen to be torpedoed or went down, there would be somebody that knows what's going on in the next ship and so forth. So on that morning, we got up real early. We had steak and eggs. The Navy fed us steak and eggs, and really a good breakfast. And then we went aboard a landing craft. My boat was in the 3rd wave of going in. They formed circles out, and they formed 3 great big circles. And then all of a sudden, at a certain time, they all lined up, and the first line went in, the second line went in, a third line went in. And they were a little bit apart so that the first ones could go in, let down, get ashore, back off, and the others go in then and hit and back off. And before we landed there, all the different ships in the battleships and all and cruisers were all throwing everything they had onto where we were going to land. It was just nothing but a burst of shells of boom, 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 all over along the beach where we were going to land. As we got close to the beach, all that firepower raised and went in a ways to start working in there, and left the beach then open for us to come in and land. And when they landed, it wasn't 10 minutes, even the second wave going in, it was just nothing but solid bursts of shells again on the beaches, and it was the Japanese of throwing the bombs, throwing the artillery in and mortars and everything there. So when I landed, they were just wham, 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 every place. And you couldn't dig a foxhole or anything like that. There was no way to do it because the beaches were ash, and the ash was no footing with it. You sank down. Every time you put your foot down, you'd go about like that, and then when you'd dig, and it was sort of uphill, and as you dig to go, you'd even push everything back pretty easy. And it was just, you'd slide as you'd go up. And so it was really tough. And what you'd do, you'd go from one shell hole to another, because that was the only protection there was on the beach. There was nothing else, and that wasn't too much protection. But as long as you get below ground level, anytime that if you can get below ground level, when a shell goes off over here and the shrapnel goes in all directions, this way, all around, but it don't go in the ground that way. I mean, if you're over here quite a ways, the shrapnel goes right like that, and it doesn't go down in to get you. So if you can go from one of those to the next, to the next, to the next, if they're fairly close, you're okay. But if they get to be a distance, then you're really exposed. And I didn't see any Japs right the first day at all. I didn't see any of them, but you could hear small arms fire because our artillery had moved on in, our shelling from our ships had moved on farther and deeper in, and so that by that time the Japanese were dug in 5 stories deep down into the ground. They'd been there for 75 years, and they had that honeycomb like an anthill down in below. They also had tremendous observation because there was a mountain at one end called Suribachi, and it was an inactive volcano, although there was kind of smoke come off at different times. But they were up there, and they could look down right straight onto that beach and see every move that was being made down there. And then they had communication with their artillery and their mortars out in the flatland and everything. There was nothing above ground, only scrub growth of some kind. Not very high, not very much of it, and it was real rough out. On the island, there were 2 airports that were done and had been in use, and the third one was being built. The island was only 5 miles long, approximately, and about 2.5 miles wide at the widest part, and then it came down and into the mountain was the only thing down here, and it was about 1/4 mile across the neck. And when we went in, we had the 3 divisions. The 5th Division swung around to the island. The 4th Division went across the island neck and went started up toward the big end, and the 5th Marine Division just turned and formed the line, and we hooked up and started to cross. Now that's where it was the first day, about the second day, we were starting to get into that kind of a situation. We were having an awful lot of trouble because we couldn't get our tanks in. Our tanks, we'd bring the tanks in, and when they would come off and go in, they'd go right down into the ash. So what they'd done, they brought in some mesh, metal mesh, wire mesh, like you'd wipe your feet on, although they were bigger when you go in the winter time. And they'd lay that down in front of the tank, pull the tank up, pick the one up back here, pull it around there, pull on it, take the next one around, pull it. And that's the way they moved those tanks up till they got them up where that they could take a hold. Now, when we landed and we had the beach going up, it leveled out up there, and that's where the airport was. So you could see clear across the island.
When you got there in the 3rd wave,
Right.
what was your responsibility and what was the
Nothing.
situation?
I had nothing, only to find headquarters or set headquarters up. And I set up headquarters for the 4th Marine Division. And what happened was I was going up there, and I was by myself, you understand. I had one guy with me. And I didn't know where anything was yet. I knew where about we were to set up headquarters and everything. And so I started up that direction, going from hole to hole, this guy and I. And I get up get up pretty close to the top, and all of a sudden machine gun fire was coming down right where I was. And so I tried to spot where it was coming from, and I could see the flashes coming out of a little slit part up there. And I figured, well, that was some kind of a lookout for them or something, but I didn't know what it was. So I saw a lieutenant over, and I said, "Lieutenant, can you give me a hand here?" And he said, what did I want? And I said, "Well, I need your guys." I said, "I need for a bunch of them to aim up there at that foxhole, or not foxhole, but that bunker, and keep firing in there to keep those guys from firing so we can get in there." And I said, "We're going up each side." So he took his guys and put them around, and he started in the firing, so somebody was firing in there all the time, and that kind of kept those guys from shooting down at us. And then I took our guys that I had got some of his men, and I took a couple, three on my side and a couple, three on the other side, and we went up the side and then went in and threw grenades in. And when we threw the grenades in, it cleared things out pretty good.
And that was situated.
And then that was where I set up headquarters, and I looked to see how you got in there, and clear down at about 50 feet or so. Don't ask me how far down. There was a hole. It was probably about like this, and it had been cemented around, and you could go down in. And so I went down in. Two of us went down in, and we went back in there, and there was about 5 or 6 guys in there that were dead. And I went in and took a look at it, and I said, "This is where we're setting up headquarters." And I go back out, and I said, "Get the guys out of there that's in there." And then I went looking for some guys from the 4th Marine Division. And I got a platoon of guys, and I told the platoon leader, the lieutenant, I said, "Do you have any idea where any of the company commanders are, or the regimental commanders?" Well, he knew where 1 or 2 of them was. So I sent the guys over to them to see if they could get their communication guy to roll a line over to where I was. And so we started getting and they knew where some other guys were they were in contact with, and just little by little they would roll the wire from the different ones and bring them over and into this bunker like. Well, what this bunker was the body of a bomber, a Japanese bomber that had been put out of commission, and they'd pushed it off the side, and they'd put it and made it into a bunker then, cemented it over and put ash all over it and everything. And they had used that really as a spotting for the beach down there, because when you looked out of the head of the plane, when you looked out of there, you could see the whole beach down there, right? Just plain as it could be. But we set up headquarters, and the general came in the next day, and he took over. And
so on the second day, the general staff came in, but you got all the
well,
contact.
no, not all of them.
Okay.
just the general and a couple other guys came in. A couple of like a head of plans and training, a chief of staff. They came in, okay, and they started in and really started taking over, setting up the maps, doing everything. And then they took over, and I didn't do too much of it. I didn't have anything much to do. So I went down to the artillery, which had set up just down lower than us and over, and I went down there and relieved the guys. I'd take turns of relieving them so they could take off and rest for a while, and I'd relieve the guys that were running the artillery. And then whenever the general would need me, I'd go back up. And then as we got more into the fighting and everything, 4 hours about every day or every other day, I would have charge of the division. And it was really interesting because I'd sat there over these maps, and with the guys with the communication, and they would tell me, you know, that there was a attack or a bunch of Japanese forming over at a certain place and everything, and I'd call for artillery or mortar fire or to one of the regiments to do this or to do that, move up the reserves, move them up to fill in a spot, and just all kind of things, but you just call.
Did you feel prepared for that kind of responsibility?
I would say yes, because we were taught command from the day that we entered the Marine Corps. When that sergeant walked out there and took over that group of guys, that was command. That was command. That was giving you confidence. You just learned that whatever was assigned, you do. Right now, you don't question. You don't think about it. You do it. And I learned that back on the farm with my dad when we had those guys.
Did you experience any overwhelming sense of fear for yourself?
Yes. Every minute, because remember this island, how the size of it was, and this operation was to last 4 days. That was what they planned it, because I was there when they were doing it. They planned it for 4 days. They took enough ammunition, supplies, and everything for 10 days ashore. Finally got it ashore. And it lasted 30 days, 31 days. Okay? To me, every man that's in combat has been a person that has not been afraid he hasn't been given the recognition really that he deserves. Let me explain what I'm saying. Here's a rifleman, and the rifleman is the guy that he's killing. His job is to kill. That rifleman has a clip of shells in this rifle, and he carries a bunch of clips all the way on his Bangalore, okay, up here. And he's got it filled with clips. How long do you think it takes him to use those clips up if he's really under fire and there's Japanese a-coming? How long does it take him to yank one of those out and shove it in there and fire, flip it out, put another one in and shoot? How long? It don't take very long, does it? He's done, and we'll give him 5 minutes. We'll give him 5 minutes. He can do it in less than that if he wants to, but we'll give him 5 minutes. And he doesn't have any more. He hasn't got a box that he turns around and reaches and gets some shells to put in there. Where are those shells? Well, they're pretty close all the time. Some guy, without a rifle or anything, has pulled that box and crawled and done everything he can to keep up with the supplies with the guys that are using them. What about artillery? Who brings the shells up to artillery? And you can shove in a shell, artillery shell, boom, pull it, boom. And those things weigh what? 75 pounds? It's according to what the size is. Is it 75 or a 105 or what is it? And somebody has to bring those shells up to that gun, to that or piece there. It's tough. And those guys, do you ever hear them mention them? No. What about the nurses? What about the corpsmen that do nothing but carry their first aid and everything? And by the way, you knew that most officers were carrying morphine, didn't you? I didn't know whether you knew that or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you carry the morphine, and if you have a guy that's hit and he's in pain, which most of them were, you look to see if he's got any marking on his forehead, and like I've got marking on his forehead, and then if he hasn't, you take and you shoot him with this morphine and squeeze the tube, and away you go. And you leave him. You leave him because you've got to get this line ahead of him so that somebody can get up there to get him. Okay? And we were taught one thing. It's better to wound a person than it is to kill him. Why is that?
It takes more people to care for a wounded man.
Sure. It takes 5, 6, 7 people to take care of that guy. From the corpsman to the guys to carry him. So it ties up a lot of firepower. How would you like to have those 6 or 8 guys right here at the side of you with with rifles or machine guns or something? See, so war is. I wrote to my folks and I said, Dad, they always say war is hell. They haven't come close. They haven't come close. And I've seen them killed. I've seen them in everything you can dream of. And the first thing they ask me is, have you ever done anything? All I can tell you is that I saw them in my sight. I've seen some fall. Were they dead? I don't know. I didn't go check and see if they were alive. Don't ask me. Every boy in school, I didn't ever, at school, by the way, when I got home, I started working on the farm the day after.
Was that the best way for you to cope, was to stay busy?
Huh?
The best way for you to cope with your experiences?
No, that was my dad. He put me to work the first day I was back. And there was a lot of things that happened during the time, and a lot of experiences that I had. But it was really a tough situation. We didn't take very many prisoners. I always say that at times I was in charge of around 8,000 men, and out of those 8,000 we lost half of them. And yet you don't see a movie that you would get a real movie. I mean, where that. And by the way, I had one of my tent mates back on Maui, when at our base. He was a director of movies at Hollywood. His name was Bill Price, and he was married to a gal called Maureen O'Hara. And during the war, back here at home, you couldn't buy film. They didn't have it on the market. Many things were rationed and everything. And my wife, she had a child while I was gone, and she couldn't get film to take a picture. So I told old Price about it. Price says, "Oh, I'll take care of it." So he wrote to his wife, Maureen, and asked her if she would get some film and send to my wife, which she did. And he then took some pictures and sent to me of our child. And old Price took that and he blew it up, and he blew up my baby, and he blew it up big enough that it covered the whole wall of the tent back there. And I had my child, and over on another wall I had a picture of my wife that was standing up, and she was standing right here. When I went in my tent, first place, the person I saw was her.
Did those memories come back to you?
Oh, yes. I started to tell you that when I was teaching and started teaching, I went in and I went working at teaching just like I did in the Marine Corps. I went to work. And you know, I never even thought that much about it, because I was so busy at teaching ag, and I taught ag and science both. I taught chemistry, biology, and agriculture. And I went from building, and agriculture was going down at that time. The number of farmers, the number of farm boys, and the number that was coming, they were closing ag departments. And I was out here at a place called Delta. It was Roy, and it became Delta. And we had one teacher at first. I had a half a teacher at first because I taught two places. And then after that, went to one teacher because I'd built up. And finally I got it up to where we had 3 teachers of agriculture out there. And I just never talked it. And finally one time they did an article in the paper about a bunch of we guys that had been in service. And some of my guys read it in the paper, and they were adults then, and they read, and they called me up and they said, "Glancy, we never knew you were in the service. You never mentioned it." I said, "No, I didn't. I didn't let it enter my mind. I just put it out." The only time that I thought about it was when I'd hear guys talking, or I'd see somebody do something to somebody else or something, and I thought, hey, you know, just be happy that you're free. Don't be stepping on somebody else. There's too many countries and people out here that's willing to step on you any time. And I just look at things a little different all the time.
So your experience didn't necessarily harden you, but it did transform you.
I think I grew. I think I grew from the service, and I appreciate life. It changed me in that way. It changed me in that I am a more religious man than I was. I promised my Lord that if He got me through the war, that I would do certain things to offset all of the help that I'd got. And what I'd spend my life would be helping people and working with people, which I've done. And I think about it quite a bit.
I know before we began, you said you couldn't imagine your life being any better or changing in any way. And even
well,
you look back,
it did. It changed in that I became, as I said, more religious. The gentleman that owned McDonald restaurants here in town, they came to me and wanted to know if I would want to go in business with them. That was before they'd started. And they said that they wanted me to take care of personnel, they'd take care of the money part. And I told them, no, I didn't think so. I'd promised that I'd do something different than all this business and everything. And so I didn't do it. Later on, I did work with them for 10 years. I supervised the restaurants here in town for 10 years. There was some problems that they were having with young people driving around and around and around the drive-ins, and nobody could get in.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know if I could help them stop it without causing some problems and everything. So I did do that. And I've had businesses myself in education and some outside.
Yeah.
I've managed to keep busy all the time.
Well, that's good.
I might say that I had ice cream carts, the bicycles and the push carts, and I had them in 12 cities across the state of Indiana. I did that on the side.
Fearless in some ways, I think.
Beg pardon?
You appear to have a fearless attitude towards the Marines and also after the Marines and before. You know, you were given a lot of responsibility.
Yes,
And
I tried, and I've always had a lot of responsibility, but I haven't been afraid of the responsibility. I have been afraid only that I would do something maybe that was not right. I mean, that was cause something not to be successful, or cause people to be killed, or cause something, you know. When I was calling shots on Iwo, I often wondered if I'd have done it a different way, or if I'd have called something else, would it have been a little different for the people that I was giving the support to, you see. And I don't know. When the war ended, my commanding general called me into his office, and he said, Captain. By that time, I made captain on Iwo. And I'd made captain, and he said, Captain, he said, what's your plans for after the war? And I told him, I said, well, my dad wants me to go back with him. But I said, I don't think I will. I'm going to go into servicing and in education, and I have some things that I want to do that I've learned about over the years. And he said, well, he says, I'll tell you what, you think about something. He said, how would you like to run Marine Corps schools at Quantico? I'm sorry.
no need to apologize, sir.
At Quantico, Virginia. I couldn't believe it. He said, I'm going to be commandant of the Marine Corps when I get back to the States. They're appointing me commandant of the Marine Corps. And he was offering me Marine Corps schools, which was a pretty big job.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, let me think about it for a little while and I'll let you know. And I rolled it over for a week. And I went both ways. I was thinking both ways. What life would be like one way, what it would be like another way, and had quite a time within myself. And finally decided to not go with the Marines. And I didn't. My family, a few years later, on the 25th anniversary, they joined me at a Marine Corps division reunion, and they had the opportunity to meet the general at that time. And they got a chance to know who he was when I talked about him. Everything.
Did he?
But I have later, I went in and I became a counselor because I seen that people needed, these young kids in school needed help, and they had no place to get it at that time. So there was only one counselor in this whole area when I started in counseling, and that was at Burris over here. And then, but I was the first person that I know of that had elementary counseling. And I did elementary counseling, and then later we hired in counselors for all of the elementary schools and middle school and all. And I developed a program in education that got quite a bit of recognition, enough so that it took me all over the world.
And that was a great service.
Beg pardon?
That was a great service, not just to our small community, but
Right.
to others.
I have been in and done a workshop for every state department of the United States, and also have been in about 20 countries or so, and I've met with the heads of education. Here in my own home, I met with 91 heads of education from 91 countries. And I've brainstormed with them, and I developed a program in finding out how a person learns. And I can tell you how a person learns, how you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I can cut the amount of time it takes for you to learn something by manyfold.
Was this?
And, that was what I was doing then all over the world. And it has been enlightening. I have learned so many things. I've had so many experiences. I wouldn't trade my life for anything.
Was this the vision, maybe a lifetime of service that in 45, that you thought, I can do something better for this community?
In 45 was when I had to make my decision.
Yes, sir.
Yes, because that went back to back on the farm, what happened. My father furnished the vegetables really for Marion, Hartford City, and Muncie, all the stores. He also furnished the wholesalers with vegetables in the summertime. And we would even go to the Indianapolis market. And I was on the Chicago market at the age of 14 by myself, selling a truckload of vegetables.
Yeah.
That seems impossible, but at that time, a farm boy could get license at 14. And I don't know whether they've changed the licenses since then or not, but you could have a license at 14. But he also had the bid. They bid on this. He had the bid to furnish vegetables to the institutions in the state of Indiana. Quite a few of them, not all of them, but most of them, most of the bigger ones. And so at a very young age, I was at Muscatatuck, the mentally retarded.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Richmond. I was at Michigan City at the state prison, Epilepsy Village, the school for the blind, the school for the deaf, all these different places I had been. And when I'd go there and I'd take a load of vegetables or something, I would ask if I could go through. And usually the person that was in charge would take me through. Here I am, a young kid, and they were taking me through, and yet they would tell me this and tell me that like they were talking to an adult. And I can remember that. Mm-hmm. And but I saw things that were unheard of. I couldn't believe there were children, young kids, girls and boys that were in institutions that had been molested by family members. And they were in these institutions. They had taken them from their families and left the culprit that had been doing the problem. They left them out here in the society. That was back during that time. And I, at that time, was thinking about this kind of thing has got to stop. And then when I got into the guidance field and began to see that I was working with rape, incest, drugs, beatings, runaways, you name it, attempted suicides. I have worked with everything you can dream of. And it's very, very sad. And we, right today, I see them laying off counselors, laying off teachers, and it just gets to me. They have lost their perspective of what's going on. Mm-hmm. Instead of, we only had one superintendent over many schools at one time. We had a county superintendent here in this town, and he was a county superintendent, and he ran all the schools of the county, high schools, elementaries, everything. Today we've got more people working in administration and everything, and we got out doing the job.
It's too top heavy.
It kills me because I see these kids that are crying out for help. They don't know where to go, how to get it, what to do, and there isn't anything for them. We're offering a little bit here and a little bit here. It's like giving out crumbs to birds, you know. Mm-hmm. Today we'll give them a little bit, and maybe 2 weeks we'll give them a little bit more or something. So.
And that motivated you when you went through
yes,
as a child?
Yes, it sure did. It motivated me in everything that I've ever done. It motivated me to get in, get started in it, get in there and do something about it. And that's where I went. And I see these kids now, and we're graduating 40%, 50% of those that enter kindergarten. Whenever they talk about we only are losing 20% of our kids, they're talking about high school. They're not talking about who entered kindergarten and who graduated from kindergarten. Yeah, and those are the things that I have tried to fight to change in some way or another. By the way, I've done about 6,000 or so speeches, workshops, and presentations over the world.
You have a passion for it.
I definitely do. I definitely do. Mm-hmm. And don't give me a chance to say something or to work with somebody. I don't remember ever turning anybody down that asked for help. Unless my daughter that's watching now says, well, you never helped me.
She probably will when this is over.
No. Well, I'll tell you, I asked my kids one time, I said, why did you all go to college? Why did you go to college? And they looked at me and they said, was there anything else? Because when I talk about to them, I would say when they were young, they'd want to do this or do that. I'd say, when you get out of college, you can do this. When you get out of college, you can do that. When you get out of college. So that's all they heard. And somebody would say, well, now what if they didn't have the ability to go to college? Well, then I'm going to find out if there's any way that we can change that we can get them the knowledge to do as much as they possibly can in this world. Even those people that have trouble and cannot speak or can't do anything, offer a lot of help to us because we study and we try to find answers, and that motivates us. They are doing the motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from them. So we all have something to offer in this life, in this world. If we just all kind of dig in and appreciate each other, I think we could make it a better world.
Just want to take a few moments and revisit, I guess, your time in the service, and also kind of reflect back on that. I guess you had mentioned as well, what sustained you, what kept you going during the fight on Iwo Jima. What would you say kept you going? What sustained your morale?
I'd say that probably one thing was faith that kept me going. That's what I've said 1,000 times since then. And before that, I was in church maybe on special days. We would go to church, and I always felt kind of funny about that myself inside, why and everything. But faith kept me going was one thing. My wife and kids, or child at that time, one child, kept me going, and family and all those kind of things. But then I also wanted to do something, and I had an urge all the time. And between all of those things was a positive thinking. I had a guy that most of the guys would have people that they'd be in a shell hole or something with. They weren't always by themselves because one of them could sleep and the other one could watch, and then vice versa. And so I always had somebody with me too. And when I would be supposed to be sleeping, I'd be thinking about a lot of those things. I wouldn't be thinking about the war itself. I would think about the war when I had to be up there and doing something, because we had guys that would sneak in, Japanese that would sneak into headquarters, and all types of things are going on all the time. The island was just so small and so honeycombed, and they could just go any place. After the war, after we had ended the fighting, I went down into the caves just to take a look, and it was really horrible for them living there. I mean, it was horrible, and yet that's where they were living, even when we weren't fighting. Was in those down in there. Some of the rooms were pretty good size, pretty big, and some of them weren't. But you could go about any place. I just went in and went down into a few and then went back out. That was enough for me.
When you saw how they lived on that island and how they died,
did
that elicit any sense of sympathy on your part for
what?
When you saw how they lived on that island and then how they died as well, did that elicit any sympathy on your part? Or at the end of the war when the atomic bombs were used?
Well, I've always felt sympathy for all the people, both sides and all the people. I feel a sympathy because there's no need for war, but yet we are at war. I heard a guy say that we're into the Crusades. We're just into another crusade. We're just doing it different than we are by using horses or marching on ground by foot. We're doing it a different way. And but it's it's just very strange feelings that you get different times as different things happen. I look back and to me it just is something that seems at times like a dream, you know. I see the movies that they make and everything, and it's fairly real, but it's not really real. It's just not. They don't really show. I don't know if you remember seeing pictures, and I don't know if you plan on showing pictures in here about Iwo. But if you have a chance to show pictures on this here, you ought to show some pictures of the beach after we had been there for a week. Because after a week, at one time there was only about 4 places you could land anything. The beach was so cluttered with where they had wrecked everything. I mean, the landing craft, the supplies, big boats. They had big, later on they brought in a lot of troops on landing craft, personnel landing craft, where they could bring in 100, 200 people and pull them up there and let them out. Well, some of those were even sunk along the thing, and it's just you ought to show it, and that'll show you what it's like, because somebody was in those things when those went down, and I think of the corpsman that I rode in with, that corpsman driving that is not a corpsman. That isn't
coxswain.
Yeah, coxswain. Get it right here in a minute. He was up above the firing all the time, where we were down in, at least behind the shell of that boat that was taking us in there. He was up there so he could watch everything. I think, oh, boy, he's got guts, you know. That's what I would go through my mind when we were doing that. So there's just a lot of things that anyway.
When we thought of this program, we thought about what people in the future would see. You know, historians and students. Is there anything you would like to impart to them and future generations about your generation and their service?
Yeah, war's hell. There's no need for it. There just isn't any need for a war. Because if you go to any country, most any country, there's some that I have not been to, so I can't answer directly. But in all those countries, the people that have the families and everything, they are people. And those people, when you sit down and you talk with them and you joke with them and you talk about your families and your kids and all this, they're people just like you and I. And if we could all get that into our minds all over this world and be more people talking that, and rather than playing all the politics that we play of the games of politics and trying to gain this amount of this or this amount of that, and listen to the people and do things to help, I think that we could eliminate a lot of the things and the sorrows and the maiming of people and all that we do. Because it's horrible, and I feel if I live another 20, 30 years, I'll still be out there doing the same fight that I'm doing right now. I try to make talks that are uplifting. I try to make a talk that will make people think and will make them want to make the best of themselves, to try to do the most that they can be capable of doing. They can always do just a little bit more. I said about the person that said to his kid or something, go out and make this world a better place to live. And the young man said, well, that's a pretty big order. How am I going to make this a better place to live, this world? That's quite a job. And the father said to him, just make a better you. Yeah. And that's what I say. If we were just all just a little better, it would be a pretty great place.
I think you're right.
Yep.
Well, on behalf of Ball State and WIPB, Mr. Glancy, I thank you for coming here today and for your service. Thank you.
Well, I hope I didn't disappoint anybody.
No, sir.
Or that I didn't go in and talk about all the fighting and all the things. I could tell you some gory things, but I don't think that's what you need to know about the issues that are going on outside of what the person is that's carrying the machine gun or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I've carried them, the machine gun, as well as fire the artillery, run the artillery, and carry the rifle. And when I entered, by the way, one thing I might tell you, a little side deal. We didn't all have rifles when we went into Iwo. We had to get them when we got there from our deceased comrades that had fallen. I carried 45 in when I went in. And I said we only had enough stuff for 10 days, and they had to bring in things from Guam at the time. They also couldn't land planes, and I don't know if you knew why that they took that island in the first place. I think that maybe people ought to know why they would go to a little tiny island. And we lost, I don't know how many men there. I did know at one time, something rings a bell around 20,000. I can't remember.
20,000 casualties, 5,000. 20,000 casualties, 5,000 killed.
Yes, okay, and I don't know about them. How many?
20,000 and only 216 prisoners.
Yeah, and how many?
216 prisoners.
Yes, hardly any prisoners. That we had to kill every one of them. Yep, it was very bad. Well, a bomber going in could not. They cannot maneuver. They have to go just like this, and they're easy targets. So they've got to have fighter planes, little planes that go and protect them and can fight off the fighter planes that come to them when they get over the country of the enemy. Well, they could go from Guam clear to Japan and bomb and get back. They had to go bomb and get back. They couldn't monkey around. So they needed some place that they could pick up a bunch of fighters to go with them to protect them. And this island was 600 miles approximately from Japan. And a fighter plane could go into Japan and get back from that island of Iwo Jima. So we had to take that island so that they could do it. So there wasn't any planes that could land there, but there was one of the big ones landed there one time, and he run off the end of the runway. Now, I don't know what they have there. I'd love sometime to go back to really take a look at what that thing looks like, that island. They take trips and everything, but I never got to go. And but anyway, that's why that we took the island and had to have it.
One Marine.
Oh, by the way, we were going aboard ship. We were going aboard ship when the war ended, and we were going to go aboard, and our destination was Japan. And if it hadn't have been for the atomic bomb, we would have probably gone in, and it would have had to kill every man, woman, and child because of the way that they felt and had been indoctrinated and the way the rulers ruled. And I would have hated to have been the man that was president at that time to made the decision to drop the atomic bomb. I think it was the biggest decision that was made during that century, and maybe of all the centuries up till now.
A lot of responsibility on.
The responsibility of making that decision was fantastic, horrible, and I wouldn't have wanted to have to make it.
Saved a lot of lives.
Yes, it saved many, many, many lives. And you know that the first bomb they landed, or that they fired, the Japanese refused to give up, and that's why they had to drop the second one. And on the second one, he thought even then before he gave up. Yep, very bad.
But the relationship between our countries since the war can show that enemies can become friends.
Sure they can.
Because the people
sure
got
they
to
can.
talk
The
to each
people
other.
can. I've been with the people in these countries and had them in my home and everything. And they're not exactly like we are, because we do have a little different philosophy about many things. But as far as the basic of the of the people are the same. And they would like to come and see America. They'd like to see that everybody talked about and are so up against America. And yet everybody that goes to America wants to stay in America. But we've got to be very, very careful of what we're doing at the present today. We've got to be very careful. We're losing out right now in education, and education is the answer.
More books, not bullets.
And I can tell you one thing, that I can show you how that education is the answer. In some countries, they have such a brogue between little communities. In that country, they cannot communicate within that country amongst themselves. I don't know if you knew that or not. Mm-hmm. Back at that time, especially during the war. And in our country, we can communicate. Any place we go in this country, we can communicate. Education has done that. Education has done that. And when we go and we educate our masses, and we educate the masses, I can go out here and grab this bunch of people, and when I go in and I train, we'll just take, I was in artillery, we'll take an artillery piece. I can take a bunch of our guys from all over this United States. I can pick a bunch of guys that would run this artillery piece, and they could run that piece, and they could run each of the jobs on there, all of them. One guy could be killed, and this guy sitting at the side of him could do that job. This guy could be killed, and this guy could do his job. that you could get down, that one guy could do the all of it and fire that artillery piece. In a foreign country, they have to train and train and train and train so that that person, in a lot of the foreign countries, not all, but in a lot of foreign countries, they can only train them, they only have enough time to train them to do one job. That's it. And if you kill them, the artillery piece is down. They can't run it. They can't fire it. So that's the kind of things that education does. That we can do the whole, not just put it together by piece.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay.
Mr. Glancy, thank you so much for coming and being part of our project. And I say thank you on behalf of
Well,
Ball
I
State.
hope that I haven't disappointed.
You've done a great job. Great job.